But I really don't have any regrets. I really don't. I've lived exactly how I've wanted to. I've tried my hardest every single time. I didn't win the matches that maybe I should have always won, but I really gave it my all. So that for me is enough.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Body Serve. I'm Jonathan.
I'm James.
We've been keeping a more weekly schedule recently.
Yeah.
It's been at least 3 weeks in a row now. Is it four?
Four. We sit down every Monday now.
Yeah.
We're so disciplined.
That seems to be our routine. And right after we released our last episode, of course, news happens.
A Tuesday after we recorded, March 18th, right? Was it Tuesday?
Sure, let's go with that.
The PTPA filed an antitrust lawsuit against a number of defendants in New York City, London, and Brussels, naming the ATP, WTA, ITF, and ITIA as defendants.
Not the slams specifically.
No, I guess they thought they had it covered with the ITF, which administers the slams but does not own them.
Mm-hmm.
The claim here is to reveal that the governing bodies in tennis have conspired to create a monopoly across the sport, to undermine competition, and to essentially prove that the way that the governing bodies are set up are illegal under the Sherman Act in the United States, which is a law from 1890, which sought to break up massive corporations that were monopolizing the market.
There are a number of named plaintiffs in this lawsuit, and named plaintiff being specific players representing the whole. And you'd think that given that this was founded, the PTPA was founded by Novak Djokovic, he would be one of the named plaintiffs. That's not the case. Instead, we have a ragtag collection of tennis tormentors to us, personally.
A mix of retired players, players returning from injury, trolls. It's an interesting group.
Nick Kyrgios, Riley Opelka, Sorana Cirstea, Zhang Sai, Vasek Pospisil, Noah Rubin, Tennis Sandgren, among others.
Now, that being said, I do think it's very important to view the case on its merits and not who they've chosen to be the faces of it. It is hard. It is hard to understand why you'd choose these players as the representatives. As, you know, if you look through tennis and you think about, like, the worst people you know, you'd pick a few of these people, right? But this is meant to be a class action, and the class represents all professional tennis players. So essentially, it doesn't really matter who the named plaintiffs are. That's positioning, right? That's PR.
Sure. But you would hope that some of these named plaintiffs would then be able to go out into the media sphere and speak to what's the purpose of this lawsuit. They then become an extension of the PR of this whole thing.
Of course.
And what we've seen is rubbish. These people are ill-equipped. This is where Djokovic would have been an asset, in my mind.
Yeah.
Because say what you want about him, feel what you want about him, think what you want about him, he is able to represent whatever things float around in his head and articulate them to where you can understand what he's saying. Like, he's a good spokesperson, be it for bullshit or be it for, you know.
And Nick Kyrgios was one of the first players who commented on this publicly. He was interviewed by Laura Robson, who was off camera, and in my mind, he just bombed it. It was so broad, it was so vague. It didn't seem that he had been prepped to really speak to the aims of the lawsuit.
A PTPA spokesperson claims that 250 plus players support this lawsuit, including Djokovic, yet Ahmad Nassar cannot tell us how many people are members of the PTPA. That roll call, that membership list doesn't exist. It's all vibes.
We've already heard from a few players who were cited in the lawsuit, including Carlos Alcaraz, Coco Gauff, Jack Draper, who either have disavowed it or said they are not familiar with it. They haven't read it. They're not involved.
Who are these 250 players?
Well, we don't know. I mean, it's unclear if they even know.
So,
I mean, given...
no, I'm saying consider the top 125 on each tour. How many people know the players below them? And I'm really meant to believe that these people are reaching out to those players ranked 150 and higher? Or are we just talking about retired players? People who have tangential interest in this thing?
I mean, I guess that would count as well. I don't know. Djokovic missing was a big point of discussion in that first week because he is a co-founder of the PTPA along with Vasek Pospisil. He is the biggest name. So why wasn't he included? And there has been a lot of speculation. He recently said he doesn't agree with everything in the lawsuit. Most of it, I assume. It's possible that the group viewed him as an unideal plaintiff, right? As one of the greatest players ever, extremely wealthy. His political toxicity doesn't seem to matter given who they chose as plaintiffs. I don't think that came into it. But he doesn't look like a great plaintiff to go against the tennis powers that be because he has prospered immensely from the way things are.
He also said that he thought the wording went too hard. That the lawsuit went too hard in spots.
I can see why he might think that. And it would be hard, I think, to have Novak as the superstar plaintiff when you're complaining about inequality amongst the lower ranks. And of course, this is something that he has professed to care about through his kind of political career, but it just doesn't look good from an optical perspective.
This, of course, is an antitrust lawsuit, and antitrust legislation is meant to prevent organizations from restricting competition in their fields. However, major American sports can get around this because they have unions that negotiate through collective bargaining. Tennis does not.
Right. So the NBA can be basically the only avenue through which professional basketball players can play in the United States. The NBA and their satellite leagues, the G League and all that stuff. But they can get around that monopoly because they have a collective bargaining unit. They have a union. In order to be successful in an antitrust lawsuit in the United States, there are one of two tests, two legal tests. One of them is the per se test, which means...
As in, per se.
S-E.
Yes.
Right, the Latin. So a per se violation is one that's obvious or apparent, and it's something that places severe restrictions on competition while providing no benefit or value to the market. The rule of reason test is that plaintiffs would have to demonstrate or prove three things: that there was a concerted effort, an injury to the plaintiffs, and finally, an anti-competitive effect on the market as a whole. So per se violations are more readily apparent. The second test is a little bit harder to prove. And you'll see throughout the lawsuit there are many, many instances where the author says this is a per se violation of the Sherman Act. And you're trying to convince a court to rule with you on the easiest thing possible, like the easiest thing to prove, rather than having to go through this huge burden.
What are the accusations? The key areas are limiting player earnings through price fixing on prize money, not Loblaw's bread fixing scandal in tennis.
Yeah, it's collusion. It's not okay.
NIL rights,
which is
nameless and likeless.
Name, image, and
likeness.
Nameless, the Toothless and Homeless Foundation. That's what it sounded like.
And restricting off-court income. Now, this is tricky in tennis because you have mandatory tournaments. Why are they mandatory? Mm-hmm. Why can't I just decide not to play and go do an exhibition and make 5 times that amount that same week? You're penalizing me for having to be a part of this collective, essentially. Right. There's this built-in for the good of the sport in these rules that I think we've taken for granted over the years. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of how women's tennis in particular was born. You sacrifice for the good of the sport. You sacrifice to make sure that the sport and the league can survive and thrive and do things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily be asked to do in other professional sports. I think that's kind of been baked into fabric of tennis over the years.
Right. It's like working for a nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
You go out of your way to demonstrate fealty, loyalty to this institution. And some of the other ways that they're alleging the cartel, as they call it, restricts player income is, like you said, playing unsanctioned events, limiting severely the timing and the geographic location at which you can play those events, limiting the types of sponsorships and agreements you can have off court, the number of patches and the types of companies you're allowed to engage with, the collusion over prize money at certain events. So like the 1,000 levels cannot exceed a certain level of prize money. They actually have anti-competition built into the tournament agreements. Those are some of the things that they're arguing is an unreasonable restraint of trade, as they say. And
for example, Larry Ellison wanted to increase the Indian Wells prize money. When was it? 2012, and he was forbidden from doing it. Like, this is a multi-billionaire, one of the richest men in the world. He owns this tournament. He's like, I'm going to pay them what I want. He'd probably pay the women less than the men, but
no, that's. I mean, I understand why you think that, but it's not fair on a factual basis to say, in this case.
I didn't say he would. I said he'd want to.
Okay.
There's a difference. So we could have had the last 13 years Indian Wells paying the winner of their tournament, say, $6 million.
Right.
And then that would necessarily make it more attractive and more prestigious in a lot of ways to players because it's paying you more than a slam would.
Right. They're also not allowed to pay more than the slams. The slams have that. They must be the highest purse in tennis, the slams.
Well, this is where the lawsuit has legs. This one specific part, to me. Because if you exist in this free market system that everybody loves, what are you doing?
Right. The next major area of the allegations is that the tennis governing bodies lock up the market through ranking points and controlling the tennis schedule. And so the suit goes through things like the, quote, grueling, never-ending season of tournaments, preventing players from selling their labor at other tournaments, at unsanctioned tournaments. We know, we've been complaining about the schedule for years. Tennis enforces that grueling schedule by making many events mandatory, by removing players from the bonus pool if they don't play a certain number of events, docking ranking points and money if they don't play certain events. So again, there are legs to that as well, right? That's one of the things they should really grasp onto, in my opinion.
Also, is the year-end championships necessary? I feel like there are drastic ways you can change the schedule that nobody will remember in a year or two. It's hard enough for people. No, it's hard enough for people to keep track of what the tours are and what they do. What the points mean. It's a statement of fact that the slams at this point are the face of tennis. That's how most people come to tennis. That's how people follow tennis. Few of us follow tennis in between those big tournaments. When you get to the end of the year, people are tired, people are broken, and you're asking them to play this event in November. And for why?
Okay.
I sound like...
I mean, I think that's sort of beside the point.
It is. I'm not an abolitionist here.
Right.
I'm not trying to blow up the tours. I'm just saying that we've gotten to this point now where there's this explosive, combustive moment. And it could have been avoided because there have been so many interested parties with their hands in different pockets and serving their own interests, protecting their own interests, unwilling to budge and give a little to avoid this happening.
Right. The crux here of the locking up the market through ranking points and control over the schedule is that the lawsuit alleges players are selling their labor on restrictive terms. Right, so they have been classed as independent contractors, but there are severe limitations on how they are allowed to sell their labor. Independent contractors, under various legal tests, have generally more control over their work than employees, or they should. The lawsuit is saying, well, in reality, they don't, right? The I feel like the ranking points argument is probably one of the more undercooked aspects of the lawsuit. I don't find it especially compelling. I understand what they're going for here. You know, they're saying ranking points are very restrictive because they limit the type of tournaments you can play, the money you can earn, the sponsorship opportunities that are available. But the Association of Tennis Professionals, when it was still a players' association in the 70s, they're the ones who created the ranking system, right? There was a reason for that, because it was empowering to players.
A tennis tournament begins when a draw is made. A draw is made based on seeds. Seeds are determined based on rankings. It's one of the most basic parts of tennis, of being a tennis player. There's no way around that. What are we going to do? Show up to tournaments and just fill out the brackets based on vibes?
Well, I so badly want to give you the alternative here, like the benefit of the doubt, but I don't believe that...
Me?
No, well, them. Okay. But I don't believe that Nassar and others have really made the argument, because when they're asked, what's the alternative? It's like, well, that's not actually our job. Our job isn't to tell you what the alternative is. Our job with this lawsuit is to tell you why this is illegal. And okay, but dream big, guys. Like, you've had 5 years now to think about what the alternative is.
Right, but it's also, quote-unquote, illegal based on the application of a law that you've chosen to pursue to prove that it's illegal.
Right. So that's the... this is what the suit is based on. You're trying to prove that it's anti-competitive and it's broken the law.
If you're trying to say that the way the rankings are calculated is flawed, I can get that.
Mm-hmm. And but they do mention like how players perform relative to others, the scale of
weighted.
I don't know what that means. They don't really go into detail.
Back in the day, there used to be a weighted ranking.
Yeah, quality points.
Quality points, that kind of stuff.
But that's not the focus here.
No, I'm getting the impression that they're saying that ranking points and rankings, period, are illegal.
Well, what they're hinting at is that unsanctioned events should also be allowed to give ranking points.
Oh, yes. This is sounding a lot like...
Yeah, so think about
living in vibes.
What's the path? No, but what's the path from there?
Did you get it? Living in vibes?
Yes.
LIV Golf.
Oh.
You didn't get it.
I didn't know. Because, what's the path from there, right? Are you talking about just random exhibitions, or are you talking about rival companies that run tours? Right? And we have had multiple tours in tennis history. Yeah. Right? Tennis is a sport of labor disruptions.
Cricket had it. Mm-hmm. They had breakaway tours. Those players were banned to kingdom come.
Right. A few of the other kind of main areas they're tackling here is the closed tournament system. So the tour's license and sanction system, whereby they grant sanctions for specific tournaments to occur. And there are a lot of restrictions on that, right? About the level, about the prize money you're allowed to give out. There's restrictions to geographic location, and the tournaments themselves are not really allowed to compete with each other if they're on the same tier. So the argument is that they're locking out other possible tournaments based on this. The other kind of factual allegations are now this was in a heading, this is funny to me. The quote, sham and arbitrary investigative processes of the ITIA. So they go after the anti-corruption unit, they go after how anti-doping is administered, the lack of due process for players, having their phones unlawfully seized, having blood and urine tests taken with no basis, which is interesting. They've even accused, now they really have to be careful here, because they accused the WTA of setting up an unnamed player who was obviously Tara Moore. They implied that they purposely sent her to Colombia, fed her, and this is their words, not mine.
The Colombian beef?
They fed her beef at a WTA hotel that they knew was... No, I'm not joking. This is literally in plain English. That they knew could be contaminated, and then basically they hounded her and got her tested positive. This is the allegation.
This sounds deranged.
It does. And even if you have problems with the anti-doping system, so do I. So do we. It's just the really theatrical way in which it's presented, I think, detracts.
How is it in the WTA's best interest to have one of its players test positive for a banned substance?
Because she was a player who was speaking out about the WTA and they were trying to silence her.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
Clearly
we're
that
talking
didn't work.
about conspiracy theories, which
Yes.
is in keeping with a lot of these named plaintiffs.
And through the entire lawsuit, they're called the conspirators or the cartel, simply the cartel. The lawsuit was written knowing that people would read it, right? Knowing that fans would read it, knowing that there would be quotes pulled directly from the suit. I don't blame them. Like, we saw that with a lot of these PR suits between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. Those suits were written for public consumption. And I think there's an element of that here.
We don't have TikTok girlies going wild reading
That's true.
these. They have us. That's it.
No, but I refuse to believe that this was done recklessly.
Oh.
Without purpose. I mean, you've paid a big law firm to do this, right? To write this for you. I don't think it was written by accident in this way. And I think this is a little bit off topic, but I think in the way that they've chosen the plaintiffs, how Nassar and some of the plaintiffs has been speaking publicly, I think there is some strategy to this public relations. I think there's a resistance to make this sound too professionalized. I think they want it to sound like this ragtag group of labor organizers who don't say all the right things, right? Who don't have like all the legalese memorized. I think that's part of the strategy. I honestly do.
I think you're giving it a lot more credit than it deserves. Not that there isn't substance in the lawsuit that is with merit. I'm just saying that the strategy behind it.
Fair enough. Because when I read an interview with the executive director of the PTPA, I expect more.
No,
I expect someone who's better prepared. And if you're not, maybe there's there.
No, I think the there is that there's nothing there.
Okay.
Literally upstairs, nothing there. Because who are the people who are willing to be named plaintiffs to go and educate themselves to be able to speak to these things? We already know tennis players are not the brightest bunches.
Which is why
which is not a knock on them necessarily. It's that they haven't had literally a formal education. You know, like their entire life has been tennis since the age of 3 to 8. Most of them start, right? There's the schooling part and being able to read between the lines, reading comprehension. It just doesn't exist. It's a matter of fact. What I think here is that you have people who, based on their political leanings, are willing to be part of this kind of thing and are aligned with the people behind it politically. I think that's all it is. And then you throw in a few other people in there who, you know, give it a little bit of diversity, even though we're not doing DEI anymore.
No. I'm not surprised that there could be 250 players who've expressed some level of support for either the PTPA or for this action specifically. Players, I mean, we hear them talk about the anti-doping process. A lot of players are willing to give their opinions even if they're completely uninformed, right? They don't feel the burden of having to read something before commenting on it. We know this. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are over 200 players who are like, yeah, I'm for it. They may not really know the contents.
They may be for one thing that was spoken to them.
Right, and they may be really disillusioned with the way things are, which is totally understandable.
I think Arina Sabalenka probably signed her name like 5 times.
Stop. She's not involved officially. So, I did read all 167 pages or whatever. It was hard. It was a slog. And there's a lot of legal stuff that...
You're a very fast reader, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. But...
I'm very slow.
You know, we don't have any legal training, right? There's a lot of things we don't understand that goes over our head. I can just read what's in front of me. But what I'm trying to understand is at the end of the day, what do they want? We know what the goal is on paper, and what they've petitioned for is a jury trial. They've petitioned for damages, for an immediate injunction that would stop all of the anti-competitive activity. And in some cases, they've asked that the defendants disgorge the profits they have received from their inequitable conduct, and that the court order that a trust is established that players can seek restitution from. So those are the things on paper that they're asking for.
I think we know the micro, but we don't know what it means on the macro level. Because reading this stuff, thinking about it, understanding how tennis operates, this would require blowing everything up.
Oh, yeah.
It would be burnt to the ground and something else would have to take its place. And we have been asked, how would that look in the past? We don't know.
And
I can't even think that big
no.
to see how that would happen. So tell us.
Well, the parties involved don't know either.
Well,
Right.
no, they don't, but they're telling us they don't have to know, but they don't know. Nobody has a solution. How is this going to work in reality?
Right.
Do you want it burnt to the ground, or are you going big with this lawsuit to get smaller changes? Mm-hmm. You know, you ask for 100 million, you get 20, kind of thing. When you were hoping for 15.
And Nassar, on a conference call and in an interview with Ben Rothenberg and elsewhere, said that they're not actually trying to burn the whole thing down. They have asked for a jury trial in the suit, but they don't actually hope that it goes to litigation, right? They want to force everybody to come to the table because the ATP and WTA have patently refused to negotiate with this body up until now. This lawsuit may force them to. Nassar, in the interview with Ben, he said this is about reform. He said, like, point blank, we don't want to go to trial. It's going to cost so much money. This is about reform. But the lawsuit lays out very, very extensively that the structure itself is illegal. The structure that rules tennis is an illegal cartel of co-conspirators that are undermining competition.
They could have just said antiquated.
How do you disrupt that with reform?
Right.
You don't, right? You disrupt that with revolution.
These are entities that have existed and governed the sport for decades.
Yeah.
Some more than a century. It's not like these are upstarts. These people have been part of the tennis fabric from its inception almost. The WTA came along. I guess that was a revolutionary spark.
Oh, sure. I mean, the move from the amateur to professional era, there have been major disruptions, right? But there are some legacy organizations like the ITF, the Davis Cup, the Slams. These are over 100-year-old institutions. I'm just saying, I don't really... So given the amount of money that's been invested by Bill Ackman, given the aggressiveness of this lawsuit, I don't buy that reform is the only outcome you're looking for. It would undermine your position, right? You're saying that this is illegal, the way it's set up, but you're only asking for, like, some concessions? Like better resources and working conditions for players? I don't think that's the only outcome you're looking for.
What about unionization?
Good question. Back when the PTPA was formed, Vasek Pospisil said it would have, quote, essentially the same function as a union, unquote, which, of course, even at the time was false. It was obviously false.
The cherubed lackey. That's what I call him.
Because this is not a recognized bargaining unit. It has no legal bargaining power with the organizations. It's not the legal representative of players as a union would be. So, of course, it was never going to be a union. And because players have been classed as independent contractors, they have no protection in the U.S. under the National Labor Relations Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, or any anti-discrimination legislation. So, like the Civil Rights Act. And crucially, because independent contractors are not covered by the National Labor Relations Act, they cannot unionize. The question here is, are these people employees or are they independent contractors? I read this very interesting article from the SMU Law Review, Southern Methodist University. It's out there, and if you have a public library account, chances are you can get to these databases for scholarly articles. This was basically a law student making the argument that tennis players have been misclassified as independent contractors and that a court must rule that they're employees. It was so interesting.
Right. But which court? In which jurisdiction? In which country? This lawsuit has been filed in New York City, London, Brussels. You referenced the Sherman Act.
Right.
That does not have
No.
jurisdiction in Brussels.
No.
So are you hoping that it just sticks in one of those countries? What if it's thrown out in the US, in London, but Brussels takes it on? Does it have more teeth in one country
Right.
over the other? This is...
I don't know. And those are legal questions that we are not qualified to answer. What is important here is that in the United States, tennis players are not considered to be employees, therefore they are not allowed to unionize. This article that I read laid out the 3 different legal tests that are applied to determine whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. We have a legal test in Canada that I'm very familiar with because of my work.
HR.
Yeah, the first...
Babylon.
Police. The first test, I forgot what it's called, but it's very similar to the Canadian one. The one that is kind of more progressive, more permissive, is called the ABC test, which starts from the premise that this person is an employee, prove me wrong. You don't want to know all that. But
I don't know.
essentially, if the ABC test were the one that were applied, if a federal court ruled based on this test, there's actually a chance that tennis players could be seen as employees, and therefore would most likely be allowed to form a union. That's not where we are. And based on the lawsuit, there is no impetus by the PTPA to become a bargaining unit. There's nowhere in the lawsuit, in the over 160 pages, do they ask for tennis players to be recognized as employees. That's not an end here. It's not an aim. So my question is, when you really get down to it, the PTPA is not a union. They don't want to be a union. So what is it about? And why has someone like Bill Ackman, who's an activist investor, a Trump supporter, all around, not a great guy, why has he spent so much money on this thing? Is it purely altruistic?
What is his return on investment? What is he expecting?
Right.
And why is Nassar out here hoping for Trump's involvement in this thing?
Oh.
For him to dip his swarthy toes into the tennis waters, like he's done with golf.
Mm-hmm. His gangrenous, gout-ridden toes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So my question with this whole thing is, are they really going to be satisfied with some concessions on prize money and scheduling, playing conditions, all of which are very important and need to be addressed? But is that enough, right? Do they actually want to tear the whole thing down? Do they actually want to create this LIV Golf thing? And to be clear, these are my questions. I'm not basing this on anything they've said, right? Because they've said repeatedly, no, we don't want to do that.
Is there a financial link between PIF, the Saudis, and Ackman? How far back would that have gone? Would it, if it exists, predate PIF's foray into tennis? There could be so many things behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Which is typically how it happens.
And I want to actually talk about that a bit later, but the response so far, the ATP went really hard in its response. The WTA, not as much.
The ATP issued a statement saying, while ATP has remained focused on delivering reforms that benefit players at multiple levels, the PTPA has consistently chosen division and distraction through misinformation over progress.
I mean, this is classic union busting language, which is funny to me because this is not a union, but this is very aggressive anti-union language that we hear in all industries.
We've seen that there's been progress that's been made in the last few years. Is it just lip service? Is it just small concessions? Compared to other leagues and organizations, professional leagues, tennis players get a smaller percentage of the money.
Right. And this is probably one of the strongest areas of their argument, even though it's not equivalent. But calling out the fact that the slams altogether made well over $1.2 billion in revenue last year, that tennis players are making less than 20% of the revenue pool back in prize money compared to 40 to 50% in a lot of the major sports in the United States. Again, it's not a direct comparison, but it's smart to highlight those things.
Maybe it's time to get rid of some of the mouths that need to be fed. Do we need the ITF? I don't have the answer to that. I'm just saying.
Know. Well, exactly, right?
You have the USTA running the US Open, giving maybe 15% of its total gross profit to prize money. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that, but it's something small like that, right? Compared to, say, the NBA, where the players make 50% of the money that's generated.
Right, revenue. Not
revenue, yeah. That money is then used for, in part, developmental purposes, where you employ somebody like Patrick McEnroe to tell a 15-year-old girl that she's too fat to serve, to live, to play, to even be seen in public, rather than actually develop tennis players. Cut that fat.
Well, they did. Now he's apparently working for Sirius XM Radio.
Imagine my shock when I was driving home and listening to my 70s on 7.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap here with the stuff we talked about on our gatekeeping episode, and I definitely want to do another, in that series.
Mm-hmm. Part of my point here is that tennis is different than other leagues because there are too many hands in the pot.
Right.
There are way too many, and that needs to be addressed.
So I laid out kind of some things that I feel are strong arguments after reading the lawsuit, and then reasons to be skeptical, of which some are actually from the lawsuit and some are extra textual. You like that word?
You
like that word?
Your little flair?
Yeah. Firstly, we know that tennis is desperately in need of reform. The schedule, the cost of becoming a tennis player and maintaining this as a career, physical, mental, and of course financial. I think there are a number of good arguments about the schedule, about prize money, about how the sport classifies players. What is especially effective is explaining the structures of the WTA and the ATP and alleging that there is an inherent power imbalance built into the structure itself. And this is something that folks around tennis have been speaking about for many years. That on the board for the ATP, for example, there are 4 player representatives, 4 tournament representatives, and the CEO of the ATP, who often votes as a tiebreaker and will basically always vote with the tournaments. So there is not really a way to advance fundamental change from the player's side without disrupting that, right? It's not a union. It never was meant to be one, but there is a power imbalance directly at the heart. The tours will tell you that players in other sports are not given a seat at the table, like they are in tennis. But if they can't really do anything with that seat, what's the purpose? And then finally, the misclassification of players as independent contractors. This is not actually something that's taken up by the lawsuit, but it's something floating around this conversation, which I think could be a very strong argument if it ever gets any legal or judicial traction.
And of course, there are reasons to be skeptical.
Yes.
There are all these silly footnotes complaining about A, Holger Rune playing the Six Kings Slam, B, fines for misconduct in tournaments, citing a very weak example from Rally Opelka.
Please try harder.
The ranking points argument is undercooked. Calling ranking points draconian is kind of laughable, to be honest.
Yeah.
The section about the ITIA and anti-doping, full of baseless accusations. The real issue is that you need to leave the Olympics if you want to actually meaningfully disrupt and change the anti-doping process in tennis.
Yep. If you don't want to deal with WADA's rules and processes, you have to leave the Olympics. Plain and simple.
And then you're using all these inflammatory words in the lawsuit. Cartel.
Many times.
Cartel. It's unclear what they want, a jury trial or a settlement, a bargaining unit or free market competition. Mind you, these are not often compatible.
Right. And under the free market, I think you could argue that women would be paid less. Is that, if the free market is the desired outcome at all costs, is that an acceptable outcome?
Of course, there's the involvement of Bill Ackman, which necessarily makes us skeptical. Mm-hmm. And then Nasser publicly soliciting Trump involvement.
That was so embarrassing and laughable on Twitter this week. where he said basically, we hope President Trump gets involved because he has a what did he say? Something about like a well-founded interest in sports because he's currently involved
in tennis, I think specifically.
No, he said sports.
Sports?
Because he's
Okay.
currently involved in talks with LIV and PGA. Something he has a direct financial stake in, of course.
Speaking of LIV,
Yeah. So what I found interesting is the lawsuit goes through a number of historical examples of sports hostility to player organizing or player motivated reforms, but it doesn't mention anything about golf. And when I read about this lawsuit, the first thing I thought of was, okay, the most recent high profile antitrust lawsuit I can think of in sports is from LIV Golf. LIV formed a rival tour to the PGA in 2021, and immediately they poached PGA players, gave them massive, unthinkably large salaries. And they attracted some huge names, including Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka.
Koepka.
I don't fuck with them anymore, so I'll mispronounce his name at my leisure.
You were refreshing your internet browser the
That's
year he was
crazy.
featured in the ESPN body issue. You were waiting for that.
Anyway, Bryson DeChambeau, and it's reported that even Tiger Woods turned down a reported $700 million or higher offer to join LIV. So he did not join. Rory McIlroy has been a vocal opponent as well. But LIV comes in, sweeps up all these major winners, top name golfers. There's still a huge contingent of top talent that stayed with the PGA. But this was extremely disruptive to a sport that, God, is even more traditional than tennis.
With Saudi money.
Right.
And this is what's been hovering above tennis for the last few years. Again, Saudi money.
And the difference is that the governing bodies themselves in tennis have gotten into bed with Saudi money, possibly in an attempt to thwart something like LIV. Once this started happening, the PGA responded very aggressively. They immediately suspended any players who signed up with LIV, so the only times they played with everybody else was the 4 majors of every year.
If those players still qualified.
Oh, right, because they were also removed from the rankings. Right?
The golf majors functioned in effect as slams at that point. Mm-hmm. And you could only qualify for those 4 tournaments based on certain criteria if you had won the tournament recently, which Phil Mickelson had just recently won the PGA.
Okay.
At his big age. I think he was in his 50s. And so somebody at his age would be more of a ceremonial figure in golf. But because of winning that tournament, he was gaining entry into all 4 of them.
Oh, okay.
Because I think you get like a 5-year exemption or something for the one that you win. And then
it's much different from tennis in that way.
Yeah. And so Brooks, even though he was with LIV, he was high enough in the rankings to qualify on merit for a while. And then he kept winning as well. So then that kept pushing the goalpost further.
Right. In 2022, a group of LIV players filed an antitrust lawsuit alleging that the PGA used its monopoly position to extract substantially increased revenues from broadcasters and advertisers at the expense of players. Does this sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah. Then about a year later, in June 2023, in a shocking announcement, the PGA European Tour, and LIV announced that they are planning a merger. So forget this lawsuit. We're abandoning the antitrust lawsuit. Progress was very slow in that. But now what they've done is they've undermined those complaints that they were anti-monopoly because these 3 major golf tours in the world are planning to join forces and are now going to argue that they're not a monopoly. How does that work?
After the merger was announced, the U.S. Senate launched an investigation that it could give the Saudi government partial control of a, quote, cherished American institution. And the Department of Justice started investigating the PGA for antitrust violations.
Which was the initial aim of LIV. They wanted the PGA investigated for antitrust. And now that LIV is planning to merge with PGA, they would prefer that not happen.
The original deadline for this was the end of 2023. Now it's March 2025. I've been able to watch more golf than I have in the last decade because I no longer work Sundays. And it's a constant part of the conversation. Getting updates from involved parties. When do you foresee a resolution? And you keep hearing, oh, it's happening, talks are ongoing, blah, blah, blah. But still nothing is imminently imminent.
Is that redundantly redundant?
Precisely.
It's unclear where the deal is at this point. Now Donald Trump is involved. He sat down for a talk recently with Yasser Al-Rumayyan and Jay Monahan, who are the governor of PIF and the PGA commissioner, respectively. Of course, the president has a direct financial stake in the outcome. He's hosted multiple LIV events at his trashy clubs. And this is what Nassar would like to attract to tennis. So there's going to be a lot more about this. What's clear is that tennis governance is in a very strange place. The slams and the tours cannot agree on a calendar or a structure at all. The slams just rejected a proposal by the ATP and WTA. You have this messy players association, which is unclear about what it truly wants, and we will just have to wait and see what happens to this lawsuit.
All of this happened at the start of the Miami Open, a tournament we visited last year. We could be in Miami right now.
We could. We're in Toronto and it's snowing. Happy spring, happy vernal equinox.
Miami is kind of wild right now in terms of the results.
In what way? The tournament?
The results.
The city? Okay.
The results. It's been all over the place. All 4 semifinalists from Indian Wells on the men's side crashed out spectacularly early in the tournament.
Indeed.
Huna out to Opelka, Medvedev out to Munar, Draper out to Menchik, and Alcaraz out to who?
Goffin.
David Goffin.
On the women's side, Madison Keys is out early to Ayala, who we'll talk about in a moment. Indian Wells champ Andreeva out to Anisimova, who herself had to play the very next day, losing to Raducanu. Swiatek and Sabalenka are still alive. Swiatek playing Svitolina
Shortly.
Today? Yeah.
Second on at night.
And Sabalenka beating Collins in straights today.
Can I talk about that for a second?
What?
It's something, being a man, I admittedly don't remember to consider enough. These women are out here playing professional tennis on a very the highest level while battling period pain. Which is what Danielle Collins seemed to be dealing with today.
Oh, really?
I'm watching her play and all her serves, beat first or second, are barely touching 100 miles an hour. I'm like, what's going on? I was like, okay, does she have an abdominal issue? And then she calls for the trainer, and the trainer comes out and immediately gives her a pill and asks her a couple of questions. And I was like, okay, this is something that she knows that she's dealing with. It could be any number of things with Danielle because we know she has a lot of issues. But I'm pretty sure I heard her say it's cramps or whatever. I think it's cramps, I'm pretty sure. And then the announcer says, when they come back to court on the changeover, oh, Danielle seems to be dealing with cramps. Seems to be dealing with cramping. Not cramps, cramping. Which
because you don't want
could
to
mean...
loud up somebody's business like that.
Sure. But is it not a failure of us as a society that this cannot be talked about at all?
Well, yes, it makes people, especially men, very queasy.
And the mere fact that it may make a woman uncomfortable to talk about it is wrapped up in that. Right? There's a relationship between the two. When in fact, she's playing the number 1 player in the world and she's hampered.
Right.
She's not at her best for something that we don't even give any thought to. And even if you try and mention it, people are like, why are we talking about that?
Why do you think that pad and tampon commercials have blue liquid in them? Because people can't tolerate the reality, you know? Danielle is also someone who lives with endometriosis. So she has like a baseline level of serious pain that she just lives with.
Yeah. My point is, and I know I'm not necessarily the best vehicle for this discussion, but nonetheless I persist. We need to keep this in our minds and not forget about it, essentially.
Right. Which is why bathroom breaks are just not really a subject on this show anymore.
Unless it's the men.
What if they have diarrhea? Another physical problem you can't control, you know? You never know.
They're not the same.
No, of course
one.
they're not, but we don't really need to know what people are doing in the bathroom.
Okay.
Is the point.
Overall
Right.
point I take, weighted differently.
Of course. Yeah. It's not a competition here.
But the women win.
On a lighter note, Alex Ayala, who is ranked 140 and a recent graduate of the Rafa Nadal Academy, gets by far the biggest wins for a Filipina ever in WTA history, first beating number 25 Ostapenko, and then, of course, knocking out Australian Open champion number 5 Madison Keys.
Madison. I watched that match. Alexandra ran down everything. The defense that she showed in that match, crazy good. Madison would have beaten her on any other day if she weren't playing that great defensively. And you could just see the frustration on Madison's face. Like, she hits 3 winners in a point and still loses it.
A fellow graduate of RNA, Coleman Wong, who's 20 years old, from Hong Kong, he becomes the first player from Hong Kong to win a Masters match with his win over Daniel Altmaier. Then, of course, knocks out number 13 Ben Shelton in 3 sets. Lost today to Adam Walton in 3 sets as well, in the round of 32.
There was a bit of drama in that match where Amanda Anisimova beat Mira Andreeva.
Yeah.
Mira is still 17. I talked on the last episode about how I was able to move more toward standing her because she was moving more away from the Martina Hingis-ness of it all. But the brattishness is still in common.
It surfaces every once in a while.
She is 17.
Right.
That's to be expected. But, you know, we don't necessarily have to love it.
Sure.
Amanda
But you take it, I guess, in proportion, right? The offense is small at the end of the day.
Okay, is it?
Well,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. Is it small portions that repeatedly add up to a big whole?
I don't know.
Amanda was not happy. No. She had a big old blister on her finger and had to get treatment for it mid-game. Mira was not happy. And then after the match, Anisimova displayed the finger in question that had the blister, and it just so happened to be the middle finger.
Yeah. She was showing 2 fingers and then transitioned to the middle finger, on her Instagram story. This is the low-level WTA drama that I enjoy, but what ruins it every time is the dogpiling, right? It's like, okay, clown Mira for this, because she was wrong, right? Just, we can have a little fun, but then it always becomes something so much bigger.
Because some people want to clown her and some people want to crown her.
Okay, Rue.
Like, just enjoy the moment. It doesn't mean anything and move on.
Amanda was clearly pissed about it. Pissed enough to make that Insta story and even caption saying, well, oh, that's interesting from you. You know, what she said was, quote, "We all know why," unquote, at 3-1 up was a good one coming from the 1-2 first set medical. I know that's hard to understand, not reading it. But the implication that we all know why Amanda took that medical timeout was silly. She was leading in the set at 3-1. She was saying, you, who took a medical early in the first set, like, how dare you talk, basically.
What Amanda should be mad about is having to come back from playing last night and then back again today.
Exactly. Put that in the lawsuit.
Because this tournament is 72 days long. Why are we playing a 3rd round and a 4th round match back to back? And if it is back to back, why is it night to day? That's crazy.
Like, these tournaments are so long.
Like, you
don't have to do this.
You need to have Judge Judy on speed dial. Like, this needs to be adjudicated.
Adjudicated.
Yes. You look stupid as a tournament if you do this to your players. You look stupid.
And Miami has been this long forever. Where it's not one of these new girlies, one of these new spread out masters. They've been doing this for a while. What I mean, like, we have to take the drama in proportion is that yesterday or today, Iga was literally stalked by some insane person at her practice. Did you see that?
I didn't
and
know.
Yelling things about her, about Daria, just like really, really alarming stuff. This is what women tennis players deal with on the daily. So, Mira complaining about an MTO, that's funny, kiki, haha, but it's not that serious, right?
Quite a few people tagged us in this bit of news when it happened. I woke up to it, to a bunch of notifications.
Yeah, what a nice thing to wake up to.
Novak Djokovic had a hit a kiki a kaka with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And this is, if you were to pick one person in global politics that would be simpatico with Djokovic, it's this guy. So on one level,
that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. On another level, I can't even get to another level because it just is what it is. Like, this is what I've come to expect from nothing he does surprises me anymore.
It requires condemnation, yes, but there's nothing it's very in keeping with who he is and who he's presented himself as publicly. I said earlier that he was politically toxic. This is what I'm talking about. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Trump administration,
with a literal worm in his brain,
is an anti-vaxxer. Right? There's so many things you can go after with this asshole.
Trying to defund and demolish mRNA vaccine research. Stuff that is actually saving people's lives.
And don't even get me started on the personal life. Right? We don't want to go there. He's the reason you cannot watch Curb Your Enthusiasm anymore with a clean conscience.
Ooh.
Cheryl Hines?
Well,
are you for real?
He's part of the reason.
Part of.
She bears a lot of responsibility too.
Oh, indeed. Which is why I will not watch her.
But this is why he'll always be a loser.
Amazing that you can be the GOAT and win. I don't really care how many slams you have. You will always be a loser for shit like this.
It's also a glimpse at his post-playing career, and it's not pretty.
Get ready. There is a political career coming, and it's not going to be fun. I mean, Novak hangs out with war criminals routinely. Like, there is nothing about this that's a departure. But what I find funny is that the stands are going to have to find something new, right? They're always railing against the establishment. Guess what? Y'all won. RFK Jr. is the establishment. Novak is the establishment. You won.
This is your prize.
So what's the problem now?
This is your prize.
Because you don't have a political cause unless you are being victimized. So what's the cause? That you're not cool. And I've said this so many times. The problem is not that the establishment is against him. The fans are going to be constantly aggrieved because he's not cool. And he'll never be cool.
The state of the draw.
Oh, right. That's happening.
That guy is still in the tournament. He's the number 1 seed.
The ATP is doing great. In Sinner's absence, they're doing so good, you guys.
He's through to the round of 16 where he's going to play Archie Fils, who just beat Francis Tiafoe in 3 sets. Thomas Mahach, having a great year. He plays Jakob Menschik in the round of 16. Taylor Fritz against Adam Walton. And then we've got 2 more matches that will complete the top half and the full remaining 16. Alex Dumonar on court against João Fonseca. Fonseca up a set. And then Matteo Berrettini up a set and a break on Sisu Bergs. In the bottom half, Old Man River, Gael Monfils against Sebastian Korda. Musetti against Djokovic. Casper Ruud against Cerundolo. And Grigor Dimitrov against Brandon Nakashima. Okay. You want to do the women's too? It's only fair. On the women's side, we have all but 1 quarterfinal set. So the women are they're round ahead of the men at this point, which explains why they did what they did to Anisimova. Sabalenka looking unbothered so far, through to the quarterfinals against Zheng Qinwen. Magda Linette beat Coco Gauff 6-4, 6-4 today. It was not good. It was not pretty. It was actually quite ugly. She plays Jasmine Paolini. Resurgent Jasmine Paolini had a rough start to the year. She's got a lot of points to defend this year, and she's actually gaining points at this tournament. If she gets past Linette, she gets to the semifinals. Semifinals of a Masters 1000. That's good if you're in her position right now. The big story. on the women's side. Well,
Is it?
one of a couple big stories on the women's side. Emma Raducanu into her first ever WTA 1000 quarterfinal.
Really?
Yeah. At the tournament so far, she's beaten Ishii in the first round, Emma Navarro in 3 sets in the second round. Then she beat McCartney Kessler. She was up 6-1 3-love before Kessler retired. And then today she beat Amanda Anisimova 6-1 6-3. She's going to play Jessie Pegula in the quarterfinals. And the winner of that will play Alexiala or the winner of Svitolina and Swiatek. Elina Svitolina, that household, Monfils and Svitolina, they are just out here putting in work week after week after week. Svitolina beat Muchova in 3 sets. She also beat Bencic 6-1 6-2.
They're trying to put that baby through college.
That is good work.
Who knows what it's going to cost by then?
That is very good work.
We talked about Djokovic. There was also this thing, an interview with Jack Draper that went around this week, which I think was from 2022. It was from a few years ago.
Yeah.
He would ask, who would you like to have dinner with? You know, the typical dinner party question. And, I mean, it was hits on hits. Donald Trump, Conor McGregor, and Jimmy Carr, who's a comedian in the UK. I mean, what can you say? He said, obviously they've both reached the top of their respective fields. Which field? Conor McGregor, who, to be fair to Jack, he wasn't a rapist. Well, I mean, he was at the time. We just didn't know it. He was still a scumbag and an asshole. But man, I mean, I am just surprised at this point that the third person wasn't like Andrew Tate or something.
It's probably in the top 5. Let's be real. I believe this was unearthed by Anti-Tennis on Blue Sky.
Yes.
I want to give credit there. It's also a reminder that we can't have nice things.
Well,
we weren't in the
Jack.
position of being over the moon elated for his win in Indian Wells. We're not particularly invested or excited. Granted, each of us has picked him as a breakout candidate at one point over the years. But it also makes sense. Look at his background. He's a Nepo baby.
Yes.
A British Nepo baby at that.
Right. Roger Draper is his father, the former head of the Lawn Tennis Association. He's a private school kid, extremely posh.
He is the grandson of Megan Draper, who, when she divorced Don Draper, moved across the pond.
No, don't even do Megan like that. Wow, don't even
married
do Megan like
into
that. Wow.
British wealth.
Megan Calvé of Montreal, Canada? Really? Justice for Megan. Did you know Conor McGregor is planning to run for president in Ireland?
I did not know that.
On the anti-immigrant ticket, of course. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Alizé Cornet is returning to tennis. She's had a firecracker of a time in the news lately. Is that the word? What's the right thing to say there? She's had...
Sure, that's fine.
She has been the conversation for a retired tennis player. First of all, she dropped the news that she's going to be on season 4 of France's version of The Traitors.
Right, which she probably won. Let's be
Her
honest.
in the cloak in the turret. Turret?
Turret.
Can totally imagine the maniacal machinations.
Okay, come on, alliteration.
She's got the tools, right?
But maybe she was voted out first because she's such a personality. You know how they do on these shows?
But there's like 20 other French people. She can't be
That's
the most.
fair. She's probably the most low-key.
And then we find out that she's returning to tennis. She said, I'm 35, sorry. I know I retired last year, but I'm back.
People go out into the world and realize, oh my god, this sucks.
Right?
The real world is shit. I'm coming back to tennis.
It must be a difficult adjustment.
Oh, yeah.
To be traveling 30, 40 weeks of the year to then be asked to just sit down at home.
Totally. And leave a life where you employ people who are in service of you, of your goals and your dreams.
What do you mean I have to do my own laundry now? That's crazy.
Right, but even adjusting to like, well, what am I supposed to do for a job?
Well, if you're successful enough, you don't have to have a job.
You don't need one, but you want purpose. These are people who have been working their whole lives toward a purpose.
Well, Alize is different. She's a published author 2 times over. She wrote her second novel
Oh,
in retirement.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, she
Okay.
went on The Traitors. She's just living her life, period. Like, it just seems that this is what she wants to do.
Oh, okay.
But for other regular folks, they take up jobs with people who want to turn air into water and hit with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Are you talking about Sir Andrew Barron?
Sir Andrew Barron Trump?
Oh God, that's too bad. Yeah, that is his
It's the
middle name.
path he chose.
I saw somebody being like, does Andy know about this? I'm like, does Andy read his mom's tweets? I mean, why would you think this would be a deal breaker?
That family has taken such a nosedive. That brings us to the end of episode 376. I am so pleased with the title of this episode.
Oh yeah. Wow, I was shocked. I was amazed.
You had the title. I didn't even know. I pulled up my tablet and I see the title, The Cartel. And I'm like, oh, that's really good. I'm so happy and relieved that this is out of the way and done with.
Right.
Because we've talked about that. This is often the most...
It delays the...
Yeah, it's the most a grieving part of this process. And then I said to you, but what about if we change it to Vibes Cartel? VIBES. And you were like, well, and then it hit you. You're like, oh my God. Oh my God. Of course, the Jamaican connection.
I hope enough people know who Vibes Cartel is.
I think the totality of it only works if you know who Vibes Cartel is.
Well, we don't talk down to our audience, though. We assume they know. And if they don't, they know how to find out.
Okay, well, admonish me, please.
No, I'm not.
My name is Jonathan. You can find me on Blue Sky at Tennis John.
I'm James at Elliot JMR.
2 L's, 2 T's.
Everything having to do with the body serve is at linktree.com/thebodyserve. Thanks for listening.
Till next time.
Thank you very much.